name's Stuart Scott and welcome to the second virtual walking tour of magical London. We're still in the midst of the COVID lockdown, so now is probably not the right time to actually be walking around central London, so hence the virtual tour. Once again, we're going to be drawing upon the great work that Bob Reed did in his Magical Walking Tours document, which you can take a look at here. This booklet was produced in 2005 to commemorate the centenary of the Magic Circle. It contains 6 walking tours in total, and today we'll be looking at Let's All Go Down the Strand. One thing Bob Reed was famous for, as well as his magical walking tours, was wearing bowler hats, so I feel I should wear mine as a sign of honour for the time being at the very least. Now this walking tour we're going on today is largely based on the tour that Bob put together, but I have found a few more up-to-date things because the walking tour he wrote was drafted in 2005, so I've been able to add in a few more things for the last 15 years, a few more contemporary bits and pieces, and I've done a little bit of my own additional research. And that's where another person I need to mention comes in. This book here is The Great Illusionists by Eddie Dawes, and Eddie is the historian of the Magic Circle. And I've drawn a lot from this book and a number of other of Eddie's books in my additional research. So I just wanted to pay credit to him, particularly since Eddie has recently celebrated his 95th birthday. So happy birthday, Eddie. So come with me, if you will, on this meandering adventure through the streets of London. We'll travel from Victoria to Westminster, onto the Strand, and then along to Fleet Street. We'll visit a house of wax. We'll visit a den of spies. You'll see mechanical wonders and hear about terrifying witchcraft. We'll meet princes and paupers, clowns and wizards, psychics and swindlers, politicians, and even a learned pig. So this tour starts right here at Victoria Railway Station. So as I said, our tour will take us from here at Victoria Station, through the back streets of Victoria, into Westminster, past Trafalgar Square, and then down the Strand, and finally to Fleet Street and Blackfriars. Victoria Station was opened in 1860 and was named not after Queen Victoria herself, but after Victoria Street, next to where the station was. Now, Queen Victoria is rumoured to have been someone who was quite interested in magic, and one magician particularly she seemed to favour, and that was a female performer by the name of Georgiana Eagle. Georgiana Eagle was born in 1834 and was the daughter of a magician, George Bernardo Eagle, who was also known as the Wizard of the South. Georgiana performed with her father from the age of 7. In 1841 they performed The Mysterious Lady, a second sight act. One of her tricks was to tell the time on a watch held by a member of the audience while she remained blindfolded on stage. She was promoted as a clairvoyant almost a decade before the Fox sisters and the advent of the spiritualist movement. Eagle performed with her father until he died on stage in 1858. He left all his tricks and equipment to Georgiana. She might have passed into obscurity had it not been for an inscription found on a pocket watch, presented by Her Majesty to Miss Georgiana Eagle for her meritorious and extraordinary clairvoyance, produced at Osborne House, Isle of Wight, July 17th, 1846. There was speculation that she acted as a medium for Victoria's dead husband, Prince Albert, and then went on to become something of a court magician to Victoria. But there are several reasons to doubt this story. Firstly, Georgiana would have been 12 at the time. Secondly, the spelling of Osborne on the watch was incorrect. And thirdly, Prince Albert didn't die until 1861. On top of which, Georgiana never claimed to be a spiritualist. She always presented herself as an illusionist. And on her father's adverts, he would always say that they would try and unmask fraudulent psychics. Regardless, Eagle continued with a solo career after her father's death. One advert from around 1860 states, "Christmas amusements. Madame Card, late Miss Georgiana Eagle, begs to announce to the nobility and the gentry that she gives her popular entertainment in magic, mesmerism and electrobiology at private parties during the Christmas holidays." So from Victoria Railway Station we're going to head across to the Victoria Palace Theatre. We just move this way. Now the theatre began life in 1832 above the stables of the Royal Standard Hotel. Its owners enlarged the building, and by 1850 it became known as Moy's Music Hall. Then in 1863 it was refurbished and renamed the Royal Standard Music Hall. It was here that the vaudeville act the brothers Howard performed, as did the magician Karl Hertz in the 1890s. Karl Hertz was an American magician born in 1859. He toured America, Europe and Australia. He was one of several famous magicians who added films to their repertoire during the early years of cinematography. While sailing on the Royal Mail ship RMS Norman in 1898, he exhibited the theatregraph or cinematograph to the passengers. This was the first commercially produced 35mm projector. Hertz was also a debunker of mediumship and spiritualism, and even appeared for the prosecution of the medium Swami Laura Horace at a trial in New York. Hertz duplicated the tricks she had used in her seances, resulting in a prison sentence for her. He was also known for his aerolith illusion, which involved a girl dancing on air. He was also famous for the amazing disappearing birdcage trick, where a small bird is put in a cage and both just vanish into thin air. He was so famous for this trick, in fact, that he was invited to the House of Commons in 1921 to prove to the politicians that no birds were harmed during the trick. And he did this by putting the bird in the cage, vanishing it, and then afterwards reproducing the bird for the politicians to prove to them that the bird was unharmed. So behind me you can see that Hamilton's showing here. In his booklet, Bob says that we should really try and take a show in here. Obviously Hamilton's very difficult to get tickets at the best of times, but obviously with COVID at the moment, even harder. So instead, we're going to head down the road, a little bit further down, and eventually we come across this rather curious little pub that's nestled between two tower blocks. This is the Albert pub. The Albert has a division bell, which is rung when there's a vote in the Houses of Parliament to summon any boozy MPs that might happen to be drinking in the pub at the time. Our route now takes us off Victoria Street and onto the Broadway. Now as we head down the street, on the right you can see the old location for Scotland Yard Police Station, but that's not where we're going. We're going to go over the road from there to the left, and this is St Ermin's Hotel. To describe St Ermin's Hotel as a nest of deception is to put it mildly. It was here that Winston Churchill conceived the idea of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, the organisation that would be tasked with setting Europe ablaze during the Second World War. St Ermin's Hotel was home to the Intelligence Directorate and offices of SOE during World War II. It was also home to a suite of MI6 planners during this time. However, our interest in St Ermin's Hotel is that it used to be the Magic Circle's headquarters from 1939 to 1951, which happened to be exactly the period when SOE and MI6 were operating out of this building. In the foyer of the hotel you can find a display case commemorating the hotel's links to SOE and MI6, but nothing at the moment, to my knowledge, that commemorates its links to the Magic Circle. From here we're going to move back to Broadway, where we turn left, head down the road to the roundabout, follow the road around, and we get to Queen Anne's Gate, and we continue along there. We're going to follow the road around here, and eventually we reach Cockpit Steps. Now you can see the roads around here are quite windy, so you can see on the map where it is we're heading. The name Cockpit Steps is really the only reminder of what was the Royal Cockpit. The Royal Cockpit was an early theatre originally built by Henry VIII in 1529. Cockfighting was staged here, but it was redesigned in 1629 by Inigo Jones. When it was refitted in 1662, its walls were decorated with green baize, one of the possible origins for the theatrical term green room for a dressing room. So from here we're just going to continue along, turn right at the end of the road, head along a little bit further, and we're just going to turn, and behind me you can now see, this is the rather imposing Central Methodist Hall, and this used to be the location of the Royal Aquarium. The Royal Aquarium opened in 1876 and was decorated with palm trees, fountains, sculpture and 13 large tanks meant to be filled with curious sea creatures. It had space for an orchestra of 400 performers. Around the main hall were rooms for eating, smoking, reading and playing chess, as well as an art gallery, skating rink and the theatre. But by 1890 the aquarium had acquired a risque reputation, with unaccompanied ladies promenading through the halls in search of male companionship. The aquarium was intended to have a programme of art exhibitions, scientific lectures, classical music and other high-minded entertainments. But the public were indifferent to these, so the directors turned to more profitable music hall and variety acts, and it became famous for offering dangerous and sensational circus performances. Professor Fields, the dealer of magic tricks, had a booth here. Charles Edwin Fields of the Royal Aquarium and Crystal Palace was born in London in 1835 and was educated in France and England. He appeared before royalty and instructed hundreds of people in the mystic art. In days when magic literature was sparse, Professor Fields obtained large sums of money from wealthy amateurs for the secrets of magic tricks. An early magic teacher perhaps, or maybe an exposer of magic tricks. Several other famous magicians performed here as well, including Kolta, Imro Fox, Guibal and Greville, and Vitrio, just to name a few. Buatier de Kolta was a French magician born Joseph Buatier in 1845. He performed in Europe and America in the latter part of the 1800s. He was known for performing multiplying balls, the expanding die, the vanishing lady, flowers from cone, and the vanishing birdcage. His vanishing lady is still used by magicians today and is referred to as the de Kolta chair. His most famous illusion was the expanding dice. The 20 centimetre dice grows to 80 centimetres and is opened to reveal his assistant. Imro Fox was a German-born American chef who became a headlining stage magician. He was billed as the comic conjurer and was known for the line, "Marvellous, everything I do is marvellous." He was born Isidor Fuchs in Bromberg, Germany, and eventually settled in New York City in 1888. He would perform rapid-fire sleight-of-hand tricks and would pepper his audience with fast-paced and often self-deprecating one-liners. One of his shows began with a gloomy cavern on stage with a bubbling cauldron, much like a scene from Macbeth. Fox would be dressed as an aging necromancer. Then suddenly there was a white flash and the scene would become a drawing room, with Fox now a gentleman in evening dress. Fox made at least 3 silent films for the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company. He was also part of the Great Triple Alliance, more on which we'll hear later. He died in the USA in 1910, and over 100 members of the United Magicians Association of America gathered to commemorate him. Guibal and Greville are said to have performed here at the Royal Aquarium in the late 1800s. Guibal was a mind-reading psychic and Marie Greville was his female assistant. Guibal was about 45 years old, of slender build and wore a heavy grey moustache. Greville was about 25, beautiful and had long black hair. Greville wore white robes with her hair down and would sit on a chair in the middle of the stage. Without giving any signal of what was in her mind, Guibal was able to read her thoughts. Audience members could whisper an action to Monsieur Guibal, and without uttering a word or a gesture, Miss Greville would, without the slightest hesitation, perform the action. The performance was exposed by the Society for Psychical Research. Their method of secret communication was quite literally breathtaking. Guibal had worked at a college of languages in Ireland before moving to London. He had been asked to interpret for the conjurer Verbeck, and this had led to him learning the tricks of the trade and becoming a mind reader. There are reports that Greville went on to be arrested for the murder of Guibal, supposedly shooting him with a pistol in Mexico. There were headlines such as "A conjurer shot by his medium." But in the New York press in 1895, Greville was quoted in a letter from 1894 saying, "I enclose you a clipping from one of the Southern papers purporting to be a dispatch sent out from New York to the effect that I had killed Lieutenant Guibal and was under arrest. This is the first I've heard of the matter, and I hope you will give out information that the story is a ridiculous falsehood. I have not been arrested, and furthermore Lieutenant Guibal is alive, in good health, and we are playing our regular engagements. How the story started, I have not the slightest idea, as we have no difficulty whatever." An early incident of fake news, perhaps? The story would re-emerge in 1910 and was published in The Magician. Greville successfully sued for libel and was awarded £250 in damages. And then we have Vitrio. Vitrio was a Hungarian magician who performed in London in the early 1900s. His act included drinking poison and surviving. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1910 when one of the antidotes failed to work. So from here, the location that was the Royal Aquarium, we're going to turn around and we're going to cross the road to Westminster Abbey. And here we find, just here, the Great West Door. Now this person was pointed out to me by the Russian magic historian Andrei Federov. Here at the Great West Door we can see a series of figures. Now these are all 20th century martyrs, and amongst them is Princess Elisabeth of Hesse and by Rhine. She would later be known as Grand Duchess Elisabeth Feodorovna Romanova of Russia. She was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and she would become the wife of Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, who was the son of Alexander II of Russia. Now, according to Harry Houdini, in his 1910 book, Handcuff Secrets, Grand Duchess Elisabeth assisted him on one occasion. During his time performing in Russia, Houdini met the Russian royal family and appeared in the presence of Grand Duke Sergei and Grand Duchess Elisabeth several times. Houdini said that they became quite friendly. The couple would often summon Houdini to their palace Klein Michel, where he never failed to astound them. In his book, Houdini states, "During one of my entertainments, the Grand Duchess assisted me in the role of second sight artist." Houdini is known to have performed a second sight mind-reading act with his wife Bess. The implication of his statement is that Elisabeth may have been a willing accomplice in one such act. Grand Duchess Elisabeth met with a tragic end when she was arrested and murdered by Bolsheviks in 1918. She would be canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church abroad in 1981 and then memorialized here at Westminster Abbey as a 20th century martyr. We're now going to head inside Westminster Abbey and find Poets' Corner just through here. Now this is Poets' Corner. This is the last resting place of poet John Gay and author and amateur magician Charles Dickens. John Gay, born in 1685, was an English poet and dramatist. In his 1716 poem Trivia, or The Art of Walking the Streets of London, he makes reference to thimble rigging. Thimble rigging is another name for the cups and balls trick, where a gambler or a cheat uses one ball and 3 cups, and people then bet on which cup the ball is under. Careful observers studious of the town shun the misfortunes that disgrace the clown. Untempted they contemn the juggler's feats, pass by the muse, not try the thimble's cheats. In his 1727 work Fables in The Juggler in Vice, John Gay made reference to Vice, portraying her as a female magician, and in the poem she does a whole range of different magic tricks. Now, Charles Dickens is also laid to rest here. He was born in 1812 and is famous for writing Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, not that one, and A Christmas Carol, amongst many others, but he was also an amateur magician. Charles Dickens became fascinated with magic in 1842 at the age of 30 after attending a performance of the Viennese stage magician Ludwig Doppler in St James's Theatre. Soon after, Dickens purchased a conjurer's entire stock in trade, giving his first performance at his son's birthday in 1843. He went on to style himself the unparalleled necromancer Ria Rana Rus and performed in an Eastern-style costume, his tricks including the leaping card of wonder, which was something akin to the rising card, and the pyramid box, which was a version of the nesting boxes trick. It's also noteworthy that Dickens included a detailed description of thimble rigging or the shell game in his collection Sketches by Boz. It seems odd that to this day this con is still seen on the streets of London. Now we're going to move away from Westminster Abbey and just round the corner to a location that our guide Bob describes as potentially the biggest den of mountebanks. Yes, of course, that place is the Houses of Parliament, and we know of at least 2 present politicians who have an interest or a connection with the world of performance magic. First we have Penny Mordaunt MP, who is currently the Paymaster General, but has served as International Development Secretary and Defence Secretary. To pay her way through sixth form, Mordaunt became a magician's assistant to Portsmouth magician Will Ayling. Next is Baron MacGregor of Pulham Market. He sits in the House of Lords and served in various Secretary of State roles including Transport, Education and Agriculture. He is also an accomplished magician and member of the Magic Circle. He did his first stage show at the age of 11 and used magic to pay his way through university. He's particularly interested in magic of the mind and appeared on episode 5 of The Best of Magic in 1989, where he predicted a randomly selected picture, word and number. Now, in an additional venue to Bob's walking tour, we're going to head from the House of Parliament just down the road a bit and turn right and we arrive at Westminster Bridge. Now this is a scene where a number of modern magicians have performed different types of magic feat. On the opposite side of the Thames, just across from the Houses of Parliament, British magician Dynamo walked on water in 2011, amazing crowds of people on the bridge. Dynamo would return to Westminster Bridge in 2013 levitating from the side of the number 543 bus. Of course, London bus enthusiasts were dismayed that this is not an actual bus route, although it's not quite clear how this might have aided Dynamo in the feat. Now you can see that next to Westminster Bridge is the famous London Eye, or the Millennium Wheel. This is Europe's largest cantilever observation wheel, and it's been used as the backdrop for a number of different magicians doing different types of performances. In his 2004 show Trick of the Mind, British psychological illusionist Derren Brown induced a London cabbie to completely forget how to find the London Eye. In 2008, Magic Circle member and star of TV's Countdown, Paul Zenon, performed in one of the pods as part of a BBC documentary about close-up magic. As well as an amazing production from a paper bag, Paul performed what could be viewed as the world's biggest close-up trick, where a massive version of a thought-of card appeared on a boat below on the Thames. In 2003, American street magician David Blaine rode on top of one of the pods for a full 30 minutes as part of a daring stunt. And rather more impressively, in 2013, British magician and daredevil Jonathan Goodwin was suspended on a burning rope from beneath the pod while escaping from a straitjacket. So there you have it, the London Eye. Magicians have performed in it, on it, under it, and even made people forget that it even existed. And so from Westminster Bridge we make for Whitehall. And Bob notes in his walking tour that it's at the corner of Westminster Bridge and Whitehall that was the location of the first ever traffic light system. These were semaphore or flag signals installed in 1868, 30 years before the combustion engine. And that's what you call forward thinking. Now we're going to head along Whitehall to number 10 Downing Street. Now, as you know, number 10 Downing Street is the home of the British Prime Minister. It's been home to every British Prime Minister since Sir Robert Walpole in 1732. The building itself appears to be a regular London townhouse, but in reality, behind the front door, there are 100 different rooms hidden away in the building. Now, the reason we're here and the reason we're interested in this space is because many of the incumbents here have been represented as magicians in satirical cartoons over the years. This 1876 image from Punch shows Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli as a magician. He's lifting the cone of Royal Commission to display the second fugitive slave circular, number 1 having disappeared already. Using Royal Commissions to try and disappear problems is apparently still a trick of the trade. Here we see another cartoon from Punch magazine, this one from 1909, and you can see Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who is often referred to in the media of the day as the Welsh Wizard. He is depicted transforming a slavering wolf representing the budget into an identical slavering wolf representing a finance bill in an attempt to get the bill past the House of Lords. Even modern day Prime Ministers have been portrayed as conjurers. Here's Theresa May asking the public to pick any card: Brexit, child poverty, Grenfell and Windrush, representing 4 contentious political issues. And even Boris Johnson, though often portrayed as a clown, is here presented as a magician, failing to produce nurses and hospitals. And here, underwhelming with his Brexit plan. Now further down Whitehall, on the opposite side of the road, is the Banqueting House, which was designed by Inigo Jones in 1620. Inside we can gaze upon the painted Rubens ceiling. Now the first permanent banqueting hall built on this spot was built for King James I. King James I developed a strong interest in witchcraft and the supernatural and attended the North Berwick witch trials, the first major persecution of witches in Scotland under the Witchcraft Act of 1563. James was concerned with the threat posed by witches and wrote Demonology in 1597. In this text he made reference to Hieronymus Scoto. Hieronymus Scoto was a 16th century conjurer born in northern Italy. He travelled extensively throughout Europe and performed for aristocracy and heads of state, including Queen Elisabeth I. He's known for card tricks, coin tricks and mentalism. He's been called the first known conjurer of the Renaissance period. In Demonology, King James I referred to the magic of the devil as being akin to that of street performers, not natural magic, but merely false miracles. And here he also mentions Scott by name. Another person mentioned in King James I's Demonology is Reginald Scott. In Demonology, King James writes, "The one called Scott, an Englishman, is not ashamed in public print to deny that there can be such thing as witchcraft." The king, a believer in the supernatural, was unimpressed by Scott's stance. Reginald Scott was an English author and politician born around 1513. He was a member of Parliament and author of The Discovery of Witchcraft, which was published in 1584. Scott believed that the prosecution of those accused of witchcraft was irrational and unchristian. His book is a classic of the Renaissance era and an important text in the support of rationalism. It was intended as an expose of witchcraft and contained a section intended to show how the public were fooled by charlatans. Within the world of magic, it's considered the first published text on illusions and tricks. An early edition of this work can be found in the Magic Circle's library. Now, from the banqueting house, we're going to continue along to the end of Whitehall, and on the left-hand side, just up here, we can see the Trafalgar Studios Theatre. It was here in 2015 that Magic Circle member James Friedman performed his groundbreaking Man of Steel pickpocketing act. So from the top of Whitehall, we're just going to turn left, and you can see here we've got Admiralty Arch in front of us. This was commissioned by King Edward VII in memory of his mother, Queen Victoria. It was completed in 1912, and it went on to become the residency for the first Sea Lord, one of whom was the next person we're going to look at, which is Lord Mountbatten. Louis Francis Albert Nicholas Mountbatten, 1st Earl Mountbatten of Burma, was born in 1900. He was a Royal Navy officer, statesman and second cousin of the Queen. During World War II, he was Supreme Allied Commander Southeast Asia Command, and in 1947 he became the Viceroy of India, and then he would go on to become the first Sea Lord. Mountbatten was quite the magic enthusiast. He joined the Magic Circle and was the recipient of the coveted Silver Wand in 1968. He would become something of a mentor to Prince Charles, affectionately referred to as honorary grandfather, and he was the one who introduced Prince Charles to magic, leading to the Prince joining the Magic Circle in 1975. Now from here we're going to move through Admiralty Arch, and on the opposite side of Admiralty Arch, on the right hand side, we have Spring Gardens, which is now the home to the British Council, which is the UK's international educational and cultural relations organisation. But in its day, this area used to be a very famous performance venue. The name Spring Gardens, the spring in Spring Gardens, is thought to come from the dictionary definition for a plantation of young trees, but it might as well have come from the dictionary definition of a mechanical spring, as we'll hear in a moment. Now, also around this area, there used to be a tavern where the magician Philip Breslau performed. Philip Breslau, born in 1726, was a professional German magician who moved to the UK aged 33. Breslau was the first magician of note to feature mind reading in his act. He also performed with cards, watches, rings, sleeve buttons, purses, swords, dice and silver medals. He had something of a rivalry with circus impresario Philip Astley. He was also known for performing a decapitation illusion, which can be seen in this image here. So it was here at number 5 Spring Gardens that Mr. Wiggly's Great Room, or Large Room, stood. This venue was famous in the late 18th and early 19th century as an exhibition hall. The Great Room has a rich history of magic, automata and other related entertainment, and there are numerous notable characters for us to meet here. The accomplished French magician Comus performed in the Great Room. Comus, or Nicolas Philippe Ledru, was born in 1731 in Paris. He was a noted physicist, prestidigitator and illusionist in the late 18th century. He was a member of the French National Academy of Medicine and would also go on to become the mayor of Fontenay-aux-Roses. He styled himself Comus after the Greek god of mirth and revelry, and entertained royalty, aristocrats and the general public with his scientific experiments. His demonstrations encompassed the properties of nature, electricity, magnetism, sound waves and so on. Comus introduced his tricks to the court of Louis XVI, who appointed him as his personal physician. Next we have Charles the Ventriloquist. He performed here in the late 1820s. He presented philosophical and mechanical experiments. His playbill describes various ventriloquist scenes he would play out, a wine merchant and his servant, whose voice could be heard at the bottom of the cellar, 2 voices, a dialogue between 2 men of science and their servant, 3 voices, a sick man, his physician, friend and servant, 4 voices. Christopher Pinchbeck Jr. opened a shop here in Spring Gardens in the early 1700s. He was a master craftsman and the son of the famous London clockmaker and automata maker. Pinchbeck Sr., born in 1670, was known to have built the apple tree illusion, performed by Isaac Fulks and a precursor to the famous orange tree illusion. In this illusion, a mysterious tree would flower and fruits would burst into life at the request from ladies in the audience. Now, as you'll hear, variations of this effect would be performed by several magicians before it became most associated with the French magician Robert Houdin. Now, the apple tree illusion is not the only automata to be linked to Spring Gardens. In 1798, Melade moved his automata exhibition to the Great Room here at Spring Gardens. He would run his magnificent automatical museum in Spring Gardens from 1798 to 1817. The museum's exhibits included automata of a lady playing 16 different airs on an organ, a child who both wrote and drew, a rope dancer and a magician. He also had an automata Egyptian lizard, a Siberian mouse, and an Ethiopian caterpillar. Henri Melade was a Swiss mechanician born in 1745. He also worked in London producing clocks and automata. He created a series of automata depicting magicians and also built a spring-activated automaton that drew pictures and wrote in both English and French. The motions were produced by a series of cams and shafts which allowed it to draw 7 sketches as well as writing the text. This particular automaton's history had been lost when it was presented to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia in 1928. The automata had been in a fire and its restoration involved considerable amounts of work. Now initially they thought that this piece was the work of Meisel, who was famous for the Mechanical Turk. However, once it was restored, it was able to produce elaborate sketches and poems. And in the border surrounding the final poem, the automata wrote the words "Écrit par l'automate de Melade," which translates to "written by the automata of Melade." So think about that, 100 years, a century after the death of its creator, the automata was able to tell people who its creator was, and that's really quite remarkable when you think about it. But staying in Spring Gardens, the next person we're going to meet is an English goldsmith by the name of James Cox. Born in 1723, Cox began his career as a jeweller. He specialised in intricate clockwork curios encrusted with gold, silver and jewels. His primary market was the Far East. In 1770 he managed a private museum in the Great Room at Spring Gardens, and it became known as Cox's Museum and proved popular with London's upper classes. Spring Gardens also played home to Lutherberg's mechanical theatre. Philippe Jacques de Lutherberg was born in 1740 and is credited with creating the Eido-Physikon. It was a form of mechanical theatre, showing landscape pictures whose visual features changed through a system of pulleys, mirrors and coloured glass, and it made use of sound effects, though the exact mechanics are not fully known. According to one spectator, the stage was little more than 6 feet wide and about 8 feet in depth, yet such was the painter's knowledge of effect and scientific arrangement that the scene he described was so completely elusive that the space appeared to recede for many miles. Cornilot was a Frenchman who performed at the Great Room in London in 1822. He performed an elaborate magic show that featured singing and dancing, and he called himself the pupil and successor of the famous Pinetti. He too performed the automata apple tree illusion. His innovation was to make it a whole garden rather than a single tree. Now from the automata cams and springs of Spring Gardens we head east in the direction of Trafalgar Square. And these days Trafalgar Square seems to become home to untold numbers of levitating Yoda. So from Trafalgar Square we're going to move to the Strand. The Strand is quite famous for having a number of different magic shops here at different times. So there was De Vere's Magic Store, which opened here on number 295. You had John Scott, who was at 417, and behind me here you've got the entrance to Charing Cross Underground Station, and until very, very recently this was home to Davenport's. Now Davenport's Magic Shop often referred to as davs by London magicians, is where many of us bought our first ever magic tricks. There's always something magical about working your way through the dank subways of Charing Cross and passing through the doorway into a world of trickery and curiosity with the atmosphere of Victorian emporium. As well as the shop and a maze of storage spaces, it also housed a tiny theatre. It always used to remind me of the store in the children's TV show Mr. Ben. As if by magic, the shopkeeper appeared. Davenport's actually holds the Guinness World Record for the world's oldest family-run magic shop. It began life in the East End in 1898 before moving to New Oxford Street and then Great Russell Street opposite the British Museum. The shops were staffed by magicians who would demonstrate the latest tricks to the well-behaved and those eager to purchase as well as spectate. Davenport's was established by Lewis Davenport and subsequently run by his eldest son George or Gilly Davenport, and then his granddaughter Betty Davenport and her husband Fergus Roy. Betty started working in Davenport's at the age of 14 and ran the business from 1960. Now Lewis Davenport's great-grandsons Bill Davenport and Roy Davenport are both directors of the company. Born in 1881 and described as having twinkling eyes and a smiling face, Lewis Davenport was polished, assured and radiated a self-confidence born out of 3,000 performances at Maskelyne's theatres. A powerfully built figure in immaculate evening dress exuding not only charm but an aura of mystery, he had performed with billiard balls, handkerchiefs, thimbles and doves. On occasion he would transform a football into an Easter egg which could be broken open to reveal live chicks. But Davenport's is still going strong. They have an online store and I believe there are plans to open a new physical store sometime as well. Soon, we hope. So it should be noted that Davenport's was also the home to the London Society of Magicians for many years, but we're going to hear more about them a bit later. Right now we're going to move a little bit further along the Strand to Coutts the Bankers, and this was the location of the Lowther Arcade. Built in 1830, Lowther Arcade ran from the Strand to Adelaide Street. It featured 24 shops and was designed in Greco-Italian style, topped by a series of glass domes. It was often referred to as the twin of Burlington Arcade. Although intended to be a destination for luxury goods, by the late 1840s it had become famous for toy shops, with many stores owned by French, German and Swiss toy makers. It was here that Cranbrook, the magic dealer, had a shop. It was also home to the Adelaide Gallery. The Adelaide Gallery was opened in 1831. This was also known as the Gallery of Practical Science and is regarded as a predecessor of the Science Museum. It later became known as the Marionette Theatre. It was here that P.T. Barnum exhibited the writing figure of Robert Houdin and presented General Tom Thumb in 1844. It was also here that Joseph Jacobs performed. He was an English magician and ventriloquist born in 1813. He styled himself Wizard Jacobs. Initially he was probably a better ventriloquist than a conjurer, but in the 1840s he seemed to have been influenced by the gorgeous apparatus of Anderson, the Wizard of the North, and the elegance of Robert Houdin. His playbills announced a temple of necromancy or an enchanted palace. He was known to have performed the linking rings and was one of the first magicians to display the feat of changing a bowl of ink into one containing water and goldfish. He would go on to perform around the world, even doing a performance on board the Great Eastern Steamship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Now in its day, the building alongside Lowther Arcade was the Lowther Gallery, and it was here that Woodin performed. William Samuel Woodin, born in 1825, was a monologuist and a master of the protean arts, a quick change artist. He would present comic characters and sing songs. One critic noted that changes in dress were effected with great rapidity and took the audience by surprise. It is said that in his shows he impersonated upward of 50 characters. Now, the illustration on his playbill shows quite a diverse collection of male and female roles he assumed. Now from Coutts Bank we're going to head back the way we came just a little bit and then turn left into Villiers Street. And here you can see the route on the map, so moving from Westminster Bridge, down Whitehall, stopping off at Spring Gardens, past Trafalgar Square, to the bank, and then right to where we are now, Villiers Street. Now it's here, under the arches of the Charing Cross railway station, that we find the Charing Cross Theatre. This has been the venue to a number of magic shows, including Derren Brown's 2017 show Underground. Before becoming the Charing Cross Theatre, it had been known as Gatti's Variety Theatre and the Players Theatre. From 1993 to 1994, the Players Theatre was the temporary home of the Magic Circle, and this is a little bit of footage from a Magic Circle evening at the Players Bar. Villiers Street was also home to the diarist Samuel Pepys, who lived here in 1680, and the novelist Rudyard Kipling, who lived here in 1890. Rudyard Kipling, born in 1865, was a journalist, poet and novelist. His works included The Jungle Book, Kim and The Man Who Would Be King. On 8th of November 1934, Kipling attended a dinner and a performance at the Magic Circle. He described it in a letter sent the following day as an amazing evening, and even wrote to the secretary of the Magic Circle asking if he could join as a member. He said, "If a hardened old illusionist, like some people I know, can be a member, I don't see why a refined but pertinacious fictionist like me can't be one too." Kipling did indeed become a member of the Magic Circle. His interest in magic dated from his early days in India, when his journalistic activities took him to many out-of-the-way corners and afforded him unusual opportunities to witness Eastern magic. So from Villiers Street we're going to move on to John Adams Street, which used to be called Duke Street. This was home to Magic Mart, or G. Ornam and Company, which is a famous magic dealer run by George Munro. The name Ornam, the name of his company, was actually his surname spelt backwards. And he set the store up in 1899 and ran it for 20 years. George Mackenzie Munro, born in 1864, was the editor of The Wizard, an illustrated monthly journal for conjurers, concert artists and all entertainers. He would later go on to rename it The Magic Wand. He was also one of the founding members of the Magic Circle, and he can be seen here in this photo furthest on the right. It's also rumoured that during the First World War, Munro was employed by Scotland Yard, although it's not quite clear what it was he was doing. Further along John Adams Street is the former home of Thomas Rowlandson, who was an English artist who lived here in 1757. This is a copy of his 1785 illustration of the learned pig that was performing in Charing Cross at the time. As well as Rowlandson, the pig and his successors inspired the attention of Samuel Johnson, William Wordsworth and William Blake, just to name a few. The learned pig was a pig taught to respond to commands in such a way it appeared to answer questions by picking up cards with its mouth. It could spell, answer arithmetic problems and tell the time. The pig caused quite a sensation. The Morning Herald even published a poem referring to the porcine prodigy and lampooning the Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger. "You men of genius and you men of wit, you've sung the praises of your favourite Pitt. In language pompous and in phrase more big, now hail a greater wonder in the pig." The Wonder Pig would soon move from Charing Cross to be the headline act at Sadler's Wells Theatre. And for the record, his name was Toby. We're now going to move along here, turn left and emerge back onto the Strand opposite the Adelphi Theatre. Now you can see the route here on the map. Now the Adelphi Theatre was built in 1806 and it was famous for pantomimes, musicals and burlesque shows, and it was here in 1812 that Bologna performed. Jacques Bologna, born in 1775, was an Italian actor and dancer who spent much of his time in England playing the role of a harlequin. He would work in the Royal Circus and perform with the famous clown Joseph Grimaldi. It was also here at the Adelphi that Mr. Henry, conjurer and ventriloquist, performed in 1824. He did 6 consecutive sessions at the Adelphi. Mr. Henry's acts must have had people laughing in the aisles, literally. Mr. Henry has the dubious honour of being the earliest documented entertainer to employ nitrous oxide or laughing gas in his act. His show bills encouraged his audience, "Let those laugh now who have never laughed before, and those who always laugh now laugh the more." And he promoted the shows with nitrous oxide or laughing gas will continue to be administered to any of the audience who may choose to inhale it. Now obviously nowadays we know more about the side effects of nitrous oxide, which include things like sweating, shivering, nausea and vomiting, and that probably explains why magicians don't tend to use laughing gas in their acts today. Now opposite the Adelphi Theatre is the location where the Tivoli Music Hall used to stand. This was built in 1890 and it ran until 1916. On the spot now is a very humble Cafe Nero. In 1891, the Tivoli Theatre came under the management of legendary impresario Charles Morton. The Tivoli became a music hall presenting singers, comedians, ventriloquists and magicians on the bill. The performers included Fred Carnot's circus troupe and Karl the ventriloquist, as well as the magicians Karl Hertz, who we met earlier, De Beer, Surveyor Leroy, and David Devant. Charles Morton was born in Hackney in 1819. His career has been described as being the history of the music hall, and he is heavily identified with the epoch of the music hall. He would open several music halls across London. He pioneered ways to advertise and to encourage all types of music and singing. He realised that comic singers would bring in the crowds. It was only after his retirement in 1891 that he was persuaded to return and revitalise the Tivoli. Fred Karno, born in 1866, was an English theatre impresario of the British music hall. During the 1890s, in order to circumvent stage censorship, Karno developed a form of sketch comedy without dialogue. As a comedian of slapstick, he is credited with popularising the custard pie in the face gag. He worked with Charlie Chaplin, and his understudy was one Arthur Jefferson, who would later adopt the stage name Stan Laurel. Karno's performance troupe became known as Fred Karno's Army. Karl the ventriloquist appeared at the Saturday matinee on 16th of March 1895. Starred as Lieutenant Walter Karl with his entertainment Merry Folk, he used both near voices, using ventriloquist dolls, and distant voices, throwing his voice. He also used life-sized figures. Arnold de Beer was a magician born either in Poland in 1876 or perhaps in Germany in 1878. He moved to the USA as a child and would eventually become a shopkeeper, but he always had a strong interest in magic and stage illusion. He was famous for performing the egg bag, clock dial, and the Tenichi thumb tie. He also performed the vanishing birdcage. He made a fortune as a magician, but lost much of it during the Wall Street crash. He invested in a movie by Harry Houdini, but lost a considerable amount of money when the film flopped. De Beer has stated that he had solved one of the great riddles of magic, how to perform the Indian rope trick in open air, but he died a few days before he was due to perform the feat and reveal the secret. Surveyor Leroy was a Belgian magician born in 1865. He was known for working with Imro Fox, who we met earlier, and Frederick Eugene Powell in the Triple Alliance. But he was best known for the act Leroy, Talma and Bosco, and he was the inventor of the classic Azra levitation illusion. In this famous magic trick, Talma would lie on a couch and Surveyor would cover her with a sheet, make her levitate in the air, and finally pull away the sheet to reveal she had vanished. And of course, it was the Tivoli Music Hall that the great David Devant performed. David Devant was born in 1868 and he's been described as England's greatest magician and arguably the greatest magician of the 20th century. He was also the first president of the Magic Circle. He was a member of the famous Masculine and Cook Company and performed regularly at the Egyptian Hall. He was droll and engaging and specialised in grand illusion and platform magic. Rather than rely on pseudo-scientific mumbo-jumbo, he used wit and patter. Apparently he caused Queen Alexandra to laugh out loud during his egg trick at the first of his Royal Command performances. In this illusion, seemingly endless numbers of eggs are produced from an empty hat, and a child from the audience asked to hold them, but as the numbers increase, well, splat, basically. Devant was also famous for the magic kettle. The audience could call out the name of any drink and Devant would be able to pour it from his kettle. Like other magicians of his era, Devant was also a pioneer of early cinema, and for a time he became Georges Méliès's sole agent in Britain, selling films and cameras. The Magic Circle named its function room in his honour, but of all Devant's lasting legacies, one of the most pleasing is his trademark catchphrase, "All done by kindness." Now from the Adelphi and the Tivoli, we move a little bit further along the Strand to another theatre, the Vaudeville, and before COVID hit, it was this venue where they were playing Magic Goes Wrong. Magic Goes Wrong is a West End comedy show about a gang of hapless magicians presenting a charity event. Magic legends Penn and Teller helped to write the show, and Gold Star member of the Inner Magic Circle and Britain's Got Talent finalist Ben Hart is the magic consultant. From the Vaudeville, we're going to move further down the Strand to the Savoy Theatre. This theatre was opened in 1881, and it was the first home of Gilbert and Sullivan's operas, and it's Mr. Gilbert who's of particular interest to us. Sir William Schwenk Gilbert was an English dramatist, poet and illustrator born in 1863. He's best known for his collaboration with composer Arthur Sullivan, with whom he produced 14 comic operas, including HMS Pinafore, The Pirates of Penzance and The Mikado. Gilbert was also a rather admirable conjurer, who bought and studied many books on magic. He was also an avid reader and had the complete works of amateur magician Charles Dickens, but he also had a dislike for the works of amateur magician Rudyard Kipling. The Savoy Theatre has also played host to a number of different famous magicians. These include Channing Pollock, Paul Daniels, and also J. Marshall. J. Marshall was an American magician, magic collector and ventriloquist, born in 1919. He was famous for performing with Lefty, a white glove with rabbit ears. Lefty is actually on display in the Magic Circle's headquarters. During World War II, Jay had entertained US troops in the Pacific with a full-sized vent doll. He switched to a glove as it was easier to transport. Jay was something of an Anglophile and made a plan to visit London for the golden anniversary of the Magic Circle in 1955. His agent booked him shows at the London Palladium and the Savoy Hotel. When Jay transferred his act from the Savoy over to the larger London Palladium Theatre, surprisingly it ran a full 4 minutes longer. The reason for this was he was getting more and more laughs as he went on. It was around this time he was invited to become a member of the Magic Circle, and he was given the honour of becoming a member of the Inner Magic Circle without having to take an exam. He'd go on to appear in the Magic Circle's Golden Jubilee show. Now there's another magician who performed here at the Savoy Theatre, and that's our guide, Bob Reed. Not quite sure why you didn't mention that in the notes, Bob. Bob Reed appeared on the television show New Faces on 7th of February 1976. This was a TV talent show and a forerunner to Opportunity Knocks and Britain's Got Talent. Bob was up against a 5-piece girl band, a comedy duo and various vocalists. In the end he was declared joint winner and progressed to the all-winners final on the 27th of March 1976. On that occasion Bob lost out to comedian Jim Davidson. It seems that Bob's performance here at the Savoy Theatre was a direct result of his success on television. However, many of Bob's audience here were overseas tourists who didn't really speak much English, and although they enjoyed the magic, they didn't really understand some of the ad-libs and some of the comedy. So unfortunately, Bob probably didn't enjoy the performance here quite as much as he'd like. Paul Daniels ran a show here in 1989. Unfortunately, shortly after this, in February 1990, the 1920s theatre was gutted by a fire. While no one was harmed, the Art Deco theatre's interior was completely destroyed. It would, however, go on to be rebuilt and reopened in 1993. Close to the Savoy Theatre is the Coal Hole pub, and it was here in 1816 that Christopher Lee Suggs performed a ventriloquist act, and over the road from here was the Exeter Change. The Exeter Exchange, or Exeter Change it was more popularly known, was most famous for the menagerie that occupied its upper floors for over 50 years from 1773. They had lions, tigers and monkeys and other exotic species. Apparently it was here that a learned horse was displayed in 1760 and in 1772. So now we're going to continue along the Strand, just a little bit further and then turn left, and here we've arrived at the Lyceum Theatre. Now at one point this theatre was managed by Bram Stoker, who was the writer of the novel Dracula, but we're interested in the magicians who performed here. One such magician was a man called Henry Philipsthal, and in 1801 he produced a show called Phantasmagoria. Philipsthal, or perhaps Philidor, was born in the mid-1700s in the Duchy of Brabant, which would have been today's Belgium or the Netherlands. He was a magician and pioneer in phantasmagoria, a form of horror theatre popular in the early 1800s. It made use of magic lanterns to project images of skeletons, demons and ghouls onto smoke or semi-transparent screens, and it made use of rear projection and mirrors. His 1801 exhibition at the Lyceum was a huge success. Although viewed as a mediocre magician to some, he gained the reputation of an extraordinary man with special powers. On one occasion he convinced a barber that he had removed his own head to shave himself. He secretly used an imitation head made of wax. He was granted a British patent for his Phantasmagoria on the 27th of January 1802. His shows include black art, conjuring, pyrotechnics, hydraulics, magnets, optical illusions and automata. John Henry Anderson, the Wizard of the North, performed here in 1905, as did P.T. Selbit and Nate Leipzig. P.T. Selbit, whose stage name was almost his real name spelt backwards, Percy Thomas Tibbles, was an English magician and inventor born in 1881. For a time, Selbit worked as an apprentice silversmith. The basement of the silversmith's shop was leased to a magician and inventor, Charles Morrit, and Selbit would sneak into the room and study the tricks. Selbit initially performed in grease paint, robes and a wig as a pseudo-Egyptian character. He developed a reputation for being inventive. One of his effects was the mighty cheese, in which audience members were invited to try and tip over a huge circular model of a cheese wheel. They found it impossible to do so, the trick being that the cheese contained a gyroscope that prevented them from knocking it over. In 1919, Selbit staged a séance in his flat in Bloomsbury. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, attended the séance and, unaware of the trickery involved, declared the clairvoyant's manifestations to be genuine. But Selbit's most famous achievement is an icon of modern magic. He's credited with creating the soaring a lady in half illusion, the first performance of which was at Finsbury Park in 1921. The impact was immense and made him a box office hit. Nate Leipzig was a Swedish magician born in 1873. He grew up in Detroit in the USA and started work at the age of 12. It was around this time that he saw a magician at a child's party and he wanted to learn more about magic. He learned much of his craft from books and believed that magicians were supposed to develop their own techniques. One of his early creations was the coin roll, where a coin rolls across the back of the fingers. He became a renowned sleight of hand card magician and was a pioneer in using playing cards and thimbles in a stage act. He's credited with inventing the side steal, a specialised card palming technique. He went on to become a successful vaudeville magician who toured the USA and Europe. Leipzig would go on to be elected president of SAM, the Society of American Magicians, in 1938. The Lyceum Theatre sits really close to Aldwych, and we're just going to move around just a little bit to the end of Aldwych. Aldwych is the semicircular street that leads to Kingsway. Now, in order to build the homes around here, a number of slums had to be taken out and a number of houses had been knocked down, and that included the home of magician, magic collector and historian James Saverin. James Saverin was a travelling conjurer, collector and hairdresser. Saverin had a marvellous collection of magic books that he acquired while working without pay for the famous magicians Andersen, the Wizard of the North, Cornillo and Compère Herman, brother of the great Herman. Some of this material was later bequeathed to Evanian and would find its way into Houdini's hands. Before Aldwych was completed between 1906 and 1920, it was a regular haunt for street performers and buskers, including the magician Percy Press. Percy Press, born in 1902, was a British Punch and Judy performer and showman. He's been described as the uncrowned king of Punch and Judy. His career began with a penny book of magic purchased at the age of 12. He was a child actor and became a street magician at 17. He toured Britain busking as a magician and as a fairground player. In 1935 he began to perform Punch and Judy during seasons at Swanage, Herne Bay and Hastings. His shows were witty and entertaining. He was a member of the Inner Magic Circle, he became chair of the British Puppet and Model Guild in 1950, and he would go on to appear with Tony Hancock in The Punch and Judy Man in 1962. He would also tour his Punch and Judy show in France, Monaco, Germany and Japan. After his death in 1980, he was memorialised with a plaque in St Paul's Church, Covent Garden. Now, not in Bob's original tour, but if we were to continue along Aldwych and go on to Kingsway, we would find the Peacock Theatre. It was there in 2012 that Hans Klok performed the Houdini experience. Hans Klok is a Dutch magician and illusionist known as the world's fastest magician. In 2013 he broke the world record for the most illusions performed in 5 minutes, performing 15 large stage illusions in the available time. Now, in 2020, he performs at the Excalibur Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. We're now going to move along the Strand to St Mary le Strand Church, and it was here in 1796 that Haddock displayed his androids. Haddock's androids were displayed at 38 Norfolk Street, which led down to Temple. The street was demolished in the 1970s. His androids would imitate human actions, but appear to possess rational powers. He had an automaton that could write, a figure in Highland dress, and an android liquor merchant who could pour drinks on demand. We now walk eastwards to St Clement's Danes Church, which is where Christopher Pinchbeck Sr. was buried, and we continue beyond that and eventually the Strand becomes Fleet Street, which has been associated with British newspapers since the 18th century. At 17 Fleet Street, in front of the Horn Tavern, Mrs. Salmon displayed waxworks. In its day, this was as popular as Madame Tussauds. The exhibitions ran from the 1700s into the 1800s and were operated by Mr. and Mrs. Salmon. She made and sold toys and was said to be highly eccentric. She had modelling skills and taught wax portraiture and sold glass eyes. She would make life-size figures that would resemble living people and use clockwork to make these figures move. While these figures sound terrifying to me, they proved an instant hit and were publicised in the Tatler in 1710. Now over the road from here we have the end of Chancery Lane, and it was on Chancery Lane that Isaac Fawkes performed at the Cock and Half Moon Tavern in 1725. And further down Chancery Lane was number 80, where we'd find Chichester Rents. It was in April 1905 that magician Neil Weaver was offered a couple of rooms in Chichester Rents, an office block within Chichester House on Chancery Lane. Weaver was the son of an amateur magician. He was exposed to magic at a young age as his father held open house on Sunday evenings for professional magicians who were appearing in local variety theatres. Weaver would become a competent performer himself, and in April 1899 he assumed the role of London correspondent for the American magic periodical Mahatma. In this role he befriended many magicians and compiled a file of names and addresses. One of his close friends was the Liverpudlian magician Martin Chapender, a revered manipulator of billiard balls and sleight of hand performer. Chapender's untimely death at the age of 25 inspired Weaver to found a magic society. Weaver used the rooms as a meeting place for a few like-minded magician friends who were keen to establish a magic club. These informal meetings represented the beginnings of a club which Weaver initially suggested naming after Martin Chapender. The name changed, but the initials remained the same, the Magic Circle. But we're going to move further along Fleet Street. It was around this area that Pinchbeck displayed his astronomical clock. And this whole area still has a connection with automata, because here we are at St Dunstan's Church, and if we just look up here, you can see the clock. Now this is an interesting spot for a few reasons. It places us on the border between the city of Westminster and the city of London, and alongside the church there's a statue of Queen Elizabeth I that dates back to 1586, and it's thought to be the oldest outdoor statue in London. The reason we're here is to see the clock at the front of the building, because this is the first public clock in London to have a minute hand. It's known as the politician's clock because it has two faces, but of interest to us, there are a couple of automata figures who ring the bells. Now these are Gog and Magog, who are characters from the New Testament's Book of Revelations. We're now going to continue along Fleet Street to 161 to 165, which is now an HSBC bank, but this used to be the Andertons Hotel. The Andertons Hotel served as the headquarters for the Magic Circle from 1910 to 1935. So now we continue along Fleet Street, and on the left-hand side we get to the Cheshire Cheese pub. Now underneath this pub runs the River Fleet, which is where the street itself takes its name, and it was around this area that there were a number of magic publishers and magic dealers based. So for example, Visitelli, they were based close by on Goth Square. They were a publisher that produced magic books. There was a local magic shop here, Farley's, the toy shop and a magic shop. They were based at number 31 Fleet Street. And at number 138 Fleet Street was Derry's, which was a magic dealer's. But the spot we're on right now was the location where the Globe Tavern was based. In 1716, Buchinger performed at the Globe Tavern here on Fleet Street. Matthias Buchinger has to rate as one of the most intriguing characters we've met. He was a German magician born in 1674. He was known for his micrography, tiny writing and calligraphy, but also for his stature. Buchinger was only 2 feet 5 inches tall, or 74 centimetres. He was born without hands or lower legs, yet he became famous for feats of physical dexterity and was referred to as the greatest German living and the little man of Nuremberg. He was an accomplished magician, causing balls to disappear from under cups and birds to appear from nowhere. He was a card sharp and an amazing marksman. His hobbies including building ships in bottles as well as playing over half a dozen musical instruments. Buchinger married 4 times and is known to have at least 14 children by 8 women, and is rumoured to have had children with a further 70 mistresses. Wow, I mean, one wonders how he had any time to practice magic or anything else at all. The Cheshire Cheese pub was also the first meeting place of what would become known as the London Society of Magicians. The society was established in 1941 in a period when the magic circle wasn't in full operation during World War II. The society filled a gap for magicians to meet at one another's homes and to share tricks and discuss magic. Members would also perform for charitable causes. After a few moves over the years, they would move to Davenport in 1984. So this area was home to Punch magazine, where David Devant's father worked as a block cutter. It was also around here where the patent office was based, and Pinchbeck got his patent for a candlestick snuffer, and Maskelyne got a patent for a coin-operated toilet door lock. But we're not going to stay in this area. We're going to move across the road and down this little side alley, down the steps, turn right, and we make our way to Bridewell Theatre. Now this was a venue that was used at the International Magic Convention in 2012, and in this venue they had 3 of my all-time favourite close-up performers. They included Juan Tamaritz, Tom Mullica and René Levand. The International Magic Festival was organised each year by International Magic, a family-run magic shop not too far away at 89 Clerkenwell Road. The store has been open for over 60 years and has become something of a tourist attraction. As well as selling professional magic, they regularly arrange magic lectures and courses. It was founded by award-winning magician Ron Macmillan, and it's now run by his son Martin and his daughter Georgia Macmillan. Ron Macmillan was born in 1932 and travelled the world as the man with the golden hands. He started magic while in hospital at 18 when he was bored and was suffering from tuberculosis. His nurse, a lady called Teresa, gave him a magic book. She would go on to become his wife. He started international magic in 1961 and in 1972 ran the first International Magic Convention. It's affectionately known as Ron's Day and has attracted the world's best magicians. Juan Tamaritz is a Spanish magician known for highly engaging card magic and cunning psychological misdirection. Tamaritz is regarded by many as the greatest living close-up magician, but within the magic fraternity he is also known as a brilliant magic theorist and inventor. Tom Mullica, born in 1948, was an American comedy magician and bar magician. He ran his own nightclub called the Tomfoolery Magic Bar Theatre from 1976 to 1987. He learned mime so he could perform his act regardless of language barriers, and ended up performing at the Crazy Horse Bar in Paris. His signature tricks included a card under glass, where a chosen playing card would find its way under a drinking glass, despite the spectator keeping their eyes on the glass the whole time, as well as a range of unbelievable cigarette tricks and stunts, including swallowing large numbers of lit cigarettes. Yeah, so one of my favourite Tom Mullica stories is that apparently he cut out a small piece of red sponge and glued it over his face on his own driver's licence. So one day he's pulled over by the cops, he gives them his driver's licence, the cop takes it, looks, huh? Why is there a red nose? Turns to Tom, by which point Tom has already found a red nose, put it on, and is staring up at the cop like, huh? I think it's great, absolutely bonkers, but hey. René Levand, born in 1928, was a master of close-up magic from Argentina. He was famous for making breadcrumbs appear in a teacup as well as performing magic with cards. His Spanish catchphrase translates as, "It cannot be done any slower," which reflected his gentle, deliberate pace and his poetic style. He was self-taught, mostly because all the books and techniques in magic were not suited to him. Following a car accident at the age of 9, Levand only had one hand. He'd perform only with his left hand, his other arm being tucked in his pocket. Of course, this didn't prevent him from producing world-class sleight of hand magic. So from the Bridewell Theatre, we're going to continue along to New Bridge Street, where we turn right, and we're going to head all the way down to the end of Blackfriars Bridge, and specifically a pub that Bob recommends, which is the Blackfriars Pub, which is an Art Deco style pub. And in the book, Bob recommends that you stop there for a drink. Now, obviously, in an age of COVID, that's a little bit tricky for us to do. So to recap on where we've been, we started at Victoria Railway Station. We moved through the area of Victoria into Westminster. We looked at Westminster Abbey. We went past the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Bridge, along Whitehall. we looked at Spring Gardens, Trafalgar Square, along the Strand, all the way onto Fleet Street, and then finally ending up at Blackfriars. So we've reached the end of this walking tour. Thanks for coming along. I hope you've learnt some interesting and bizarre facts about the history of magic in London. Obviously with COVID and the lockdown, it's difficult for us to get out and about, so I hope this trip has given you a kind of opportunity to at least feel that you're getting out and about in London. As before, hopefully one day we can do this for real rather than just virtually, but we'll see. Look forward to seeing everyone at the Magic Circle headquarters at some point soon. Thanks a lot. Take care.